God dwells in you. Let us pray. Holy God, our stories that we tell ourselves about you say that you brought all creation into being with a word. And we give you thanks that there are words that you have planted in our hearts, words of truth, words that tell the stories of our lives, words that help our hearts and souls come fully alive. We thank you for the word planted in each one of us today, and we particularly thank you for the word planted in the heart of Tena and now on the pages of her book. We ask you to have that word come alive in this place, and may it spark our imaginations in ways that bring us to life in new ways in your world. In your holy name we pray. Amen. It is wonderful to have everybody here. Welcome to All Saints Church. My name is Mike Kinman. I'm the rector here. My pronouns are he, him. If you're streaming online, everyone wave to the people streaming online. Hello, great to have you here from wherever you are. If you'd like to be kept up to date on things that are happening at All Saints Church, and there's a lot of them, there are green contact sheets near both doors. Please take a moment to give us your contact information. And there are also restrooms around the corner over there, and so if you need those. There's also a welcome table on the lawn where you can pick up a red welcome bag, you can sign a welcome card, do all those things that help us figure out who you are and help you learn more about the All Saints community. At all times, we put our faith into action at All Saints Church, and every week we pick one thing to give it kind of a laser beam focus, and this Sunday, we're putting our faith into action by signing a letter to the U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Services opposing a proposed rule change to the public charge test applied to people seeking to immigrate to the U.S. Now, this is a proposal that will most deeply harm lawfully present immigrants and their children and what are called mixed status families, where some members are citizens and others are not. So please visit the action table to sign the letter and get more information. Also, just a reminder, the deadline to register to vote is October 22nd. That's tomorrow. And so if you have turned 18 or will be 18 by November 6th, or if you have moved since the last election, you need to register. It is our sacred duty to vote. And you can register online, and the action table also has information on voter registration. The deadline to request a mail-in ballot, if you're going to be like me and you're not going to be in town on Election Day, I did this last week, you have to request a mail-in ballot. The deadline for that is October 30th. Please, 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 there is no excuse for any of us not to vote. It's an incredibly important thing for us to do. And if you're feeling uneducated about all the ballot measures that are on your ballot, there is a recommendations comparison chart for ballot measures, and that is available at the action table. So you can pick that up, and you will be ready to go. So please do that. This congregation, as always, is sustained by many things. It is sustained by huge amounts of the grace of God. It is sustained by incredible labor and life of the people gathered here and many, many more, and it's sustained by your financial generosity. And so if you have major pledge for 2019, thank you, thank you, thank you so much for that. If you have not made your pledge for 2019, encourage you to do so. And like always, we ask you to just say your prayers and to have conversations with people that you make financial decisions with, and then to put in your pledge whatever God puts on your heart. And for those of you who are streaming online, we encourage you to pledge to All Saints Church too. And you can also just click that little button on your screen, and you can make a gift right now and support the mission and ministry of All Saints Church. One of the gifts that it has been for me in my almost 2 years as rector here is for me to get acquainted with people who are old friends of this place and people who are dear, dear, dear to the heart of All Saints Church, and that describes our guest this morning. Tena Clarke is someone that this congregation knows well. I was just reading her biography, and it's amazing, as Tena has written and produced for some of the greatest legends, such as Aretha Franklin, won a Grammy for her work with Natalie Cole, nominated for a Grammy with Patti LaBelle, and also worked with artists such as Leanne Rimes, Dionne Warwick, Chaka Khan, and Maya Angelou. She has been commissioned to write theme songs for NASA and Hillary Clinton. Which is, boy, that's quite something. And as much as she is an amazing musician and songwriter, she's also a civil rights activist and a crusader for women's rights. And this week I picked up her book, and I encourage nobody to leave here without getting a copy of this. It's called Southern Discomfort. It is a memoir. It is extraordinarily written. It is extraordinarily brave. It's just extraordinary. And so I want to ask you to give a warm welcome home to Tena Clarke.
Thank y'all so much. You have no idea how it feels to be here. I've been on the road on book tour for 3 weeks. And even though we live in Atlanta now, I feel like I have finally come home. So thank you, and thank you for this amazing welcome. And I see so many old friends and younger friends that I have known forever here. And I wanted to, before I started, to just give a shout out to my best buddy in the whole world, my mentor, my hero, George Regas. I wanted to give him a kiss, but I think Mary gets jealous. No, just kidding. Yeah. But anyway, thank you so much. And the way I would like to start, so for those of you who have not read the book yet, just came out October the 2nd, I'll start with the prologue. I'll read the prologue, and then Mike and I will have a conversation. But this will give you an idea about the book. Where I grew up, girls like me knew our place. We were expected to smile politely and keep our white-gloved hands folded neatly in our laps when we sat in church. We spoke only when spoken to. We said, "Yes, sir," "No, thank you, ma'am," and yes, some sweet tea would be just fine. Backtalk was not an option. We did not ask why. We did not say that doesn't seem fair. We were expected to wear stiff, pressed dresses even under the blazing Mississippi sun, and to have perfectly curled hair and light powdered faces in the drenching humidity. As we grew up, we understood that stepping off the prescribed path in any way meant risking it all and probably losing. Where I'm from, men like my father, rich Cadillac-driving, Klan-sympathizing men, made the money. Women like my mother, beautiful, charming, educated in only how to entertain, ran the houses. If these women had any dreams beyond tending to their husbands, babies, and barbecues, they kept their thoughts to themselves. Black maids like the 2 women who tended to me, first Viola, then Virgie, raised the white children they cared for, but they were not allowed to sit at the family table, drink from the family's cup, or ride in the front seat of the cars. Black men and children were still called boy, as in, "What you staring at, boy?" and nigger, as in, "I'm gonna need a few more niggers to pick my pecans this year." If you recoiled from the word, if it made your stomach clench and your insides boil, you were considered a nigger lover, a dangerous insult. And if word of your sympathy spread, your family feared waking in the middle of the night to a burning cross on the lawn or a brick thrown through the dining room window during supper. If your glamorous, tortured wife became an alcoholic like my mother did, you sent her away to the state mental hospital in a straitjacket to dry out. If your husband was a notorious skirt chaser like my father was, you might pull out your .38 Colt at the dinner table and chase him around the house, threatening to kill him right then and there. But of course, only after your dinner guest had left for the evening. And if you were a lesbian before you even knew there was a word for the feelings you had had for as long as you could remember, you suppressed this fundamental part of yourself as long as you possibly could. You lived a lie. You kissed the boys and wore their fraternity pins, curled your hair, entered beauty pageants, joined a sorority. You and your friends talked about wedding cakes and honeymoons and how many babies you wanted, just like you were supposed to, because that's what good girls did. Appearances mattered above all. That's just the way it is, and let it be were common refrains. Growing up in Waynesboro, Mississippi, in the heart of Jim Crow Deep South, I never thought there was any other way than the way it had always been. No one I ever knew ventured farther than Memphis or maybe Nashville, and that was just fine with them. My roots ran deep into the red earth. The land felt as much a part of me as my limbs, my heart. I hated it with a fury, and I loved it with an all-consuming passion. This is the great paradox of the South. It's a savage place, a complicated place, and yet it still burrows into you like the fangs of one of the water moccasins I used to hunt as a young girl down on the Chickasahee River behind our farm. There's venom in the soil, but there's an alluring beauty in it as well. For a time, I assumed I had no choice but to stay on the straight and narrow path that had been laid out for me since birth. I'd wear the pressed dresses, the curled hair, the pen. I'd hold my tongue, I'd mind my manners. I'd play the clarinet and the piano, even though I longed to play the drums. I'd marry a man exactly like my father, even though I was attracted to girls from the time I was 4 or 5, when I first laid eyes upon a majorette in her green sequin leotard and white tassel boots. I'd be a charming and gracious hostess. I'd have the children, the impeccable house. Maybe I'd even have the black maid to raise my children and a staff of black men to pick the pecans and cut the lawn. I'd pass out finger sandwiches and pour sweet tea, and the cycle would continue. Or maybe I'd find out I was stronger than I thought I was, and the cycle, at least for me, would end.
So, wow, thank you, first of all. As I was reading this book, and once I started, it was so hard to stop. As I've read memoirs, there, I think, can be a temptation when you're painting a picture of yourself as an author, and I've seen others fall into this, of painting either an idealized portrait or even just a careful portrait, of being really sure how you're going to be seen by others, knowing that this isn't fiction, that people that you know are going to read this. And yours is gloriously messy and real and human. And one of the quotes that kept coming to me as I was reading it is, Brené Brown talks about how vulnerability is something that we attribute as weakness in ourselves, but strength in others. And I kept thinking, what was it like to be this vulnerable in your writing? And so I wonder if you can talk about that process. And did you struggle with vulnerability, and what did you learn about yourself from writing it? What's it like to come back to a place like this, of a community, not of sort of nameless, faceless people at a bookstore, but the family, and share it? And is wrestling with fear a part of that process?
Oh yeah, but let me just answer the last part of it. Coming here is fantastic. I don't think I'll be going to Waynesboro, Mississippi for a while. But yes, fear and vulnerability I wrestled with it on the floor. I wrestled with God with it. I wrestled with my truth. And because I knew I knew I had to be just, all or nothing. And so I knew that there would be possibly some loss with my sisters because, as Celia Ward, who's a good friend of mine, said to me a few weeks ago when we were talking, and she grew up right down the road from me, and I was telling her how my sisters had not spoken to me since May. And she said, well, baby, you know people in Mississippi just don't like their petticoats pulled up. So, yes, petticoats have been pulled up. And, you know, so I have been very close with my sisters my whole life, and they're much older than me. When I grew up, it was like I was growing up with 4 mothers, because I had 3 older sisters that are in their late 70s, and the oldest one has passed away. But this book is about redemption. It's about love. It's about grace. It's about the whole arc of what we go through in our lives. And for me, I stopped many times in this process of writing this, because I just can't do it. I don't need to tell this story, you know, and I would stop. And then my daughter would say to me, and Michelle, you know, where's my courage? And, you know, I had a lot of strong women around me saying, if I was going to do it, I really need to do it. So, and also a big encourager for me to write this book was Norman Lear, who is also a very, very close friend and mentor. And, you know, I met Norman here decades ago with George, and that's how we became friends. And so I struggled with this a lot, but I cannot tell you now how grateful and how happy that I am that I finished it, that I told the truth. And I just felt like when I would struggle, I would think, I want my mom to have a voice. I want my sister, oldest sister, to have a voice, because she was the one that was treated so badly. I want my Virgie, my nanny, to have her voice. And even though she was a very shy woman, she probably sitting here today would say she was just fine with not having a voice. But I wanted her to have a voice. And with the times of where we are now, it was just the right time, I felt like, because in Mississippi, where I grew up, and when I would go home, even when Michelle and I'd go down, even over the last few years, it's, you know, I mean, people just act like racism never happened in Mississippi, that it's not there, that it didn't happen. And from my one piece of history, my one little story, I wanted to go down in writing and saying exactly what it was, and how we can change, but we can't change by pretending or making it seem like that, okay, if we just don't talk about it, we can, you know, everything's going to be okay. Everybody's happy down here. Everybody, you know, the colored folks are happy and we're happy, but that's not the case. So yes, I struggled, but no more. I'm free.
Yeah. As you're talking, one of the things I'm remembering is the picture you paint of your mother, and particularly at the end when you talk about everyone who came to her funeral. That it was not unusual for a woman of her generation to medicate her pain with alcohol. What was unusual was that everyone else did it in private, and that she really opened up about it in a way that she hoped would be that wasn't necessarily the reason, but hope would be life-changing for others. And I wonder, was there a piece of, you sort of said, where's your courage? Was there a piece of the courage that you think you get from your mother?
Oh, 100%, because when, you know, my mom became sober when I was probably 28, 29, but she had become an alcoholic when I was 3. So it was a long haul. But my mother was always my balcony person. She was a songwriter in the big band era, and my mom, and she didn't have the success she wanted because my dad always squashed anything going further than like New Orleans. But even through all the alcoholism, as horrible as it was, my mother was an amazing woman. But I did not really realize how amazing she was, I guess, until I got a little bit older and realized that this is a woman, as you'll read about in the book. She married my father, she was 15. He was 19. She only had an 8th grade education. My father was a self-made man. He had nothing when they started out either. And he became extremely wealthy, successful. He did it all on his own. But he owned the town. He was the king. And he was very involved in Mississippi politics, and you know the rest. So nobody I knew had been divorced when I was growing up. This was in the 50s and early 60s. In this little town, people did not get divorces. All the women just, to your point, just medicated themselves. And whether prescription drugs from the three, from the local doctors or from, with alcohol. And my mom, to know that she was married to the wealthiest man, the most powerful man, after 28 years, she said, I cannot go to bed another night smelling another woman's perfume on you. He had been he loved women. He had been a serial philanderer for as long as I knew, but he pretended that wasn't the case. And she had the courage to leave. And as we know, material things do not make us happy at all. And she had the biggest house, and we had the only swimming pool. She had Cadillacs and minks and diamonds, and he doted over her. He would do anything for her, but he just wouldn't be. All she wanted was for him to be faithful. But he couldn't do that. So she decided she couldn't do that. And it was really amazing to think about that now. And as I got older, she went up against this man and left. She left that big mini antebellum mansion and the swimming pool on the farm to move into a one-room walk-up above a dry cleaner's. But she was free, and she was happy. And it took her quite a while to become sober. So she is my shero. Mm-hmm. She did give me courage. Seeing what she did made me know, she and, Virgie both, the important things in life.
So that brings to something that I saw as a theme throughout this book, which is power. And your mother is right in the middle of that story of power. There's a piece that you write sitting in the car, watching your mother being dragged off in a straitjacket to the state hospital. You write, "There's a moment in every girl's life when she stops being a child and begins to grow up. Despite all I'd seen in my 13 years, I lost any remaining sense of a child's innocence the day I watched my mama being dragged through Whitfield's doors in a straitjacket, every ounce of dignity being torn away from her. That was the day I realized the difference between those who wielded power and those who had none." So much of what I read in this book is a story of power, and both in individual relationships like your parents and in society at large. First, can you tell the story about the day she got back from the hospital, how she claimed her power back? Yeah, go ahead and tell that story.
Well, my mother was 6 feet tall, jet black hair, stunningly beautiful. She always wore stilettos, and she looked like she walked right out of the LA version of Neiman Marcus or whatever. But when she would not, my father had convinced my sisters that because all the rich ladies got sent to a very special hospital to dry out, like it was a Baptist hospital or something like that. But Whitfield, for any of you that have ever read about that horrendous place, in fact, they just uncovered, I think I read something a few years ago when they were building something or digging there, they found 2,000 bodies in a grave. It was a horrendous place. You should look it up sometime. But it was really where they just sent people they didn't care about, or people that did not have money. Well, my dad had convinced my sisters that that's where she needed to go, but that he had worked out some special circumstances so that she would be treated special because she was his ex-wife. But, you know, I never knew this for sure by any means, but I just think because my dad was like, no one would ever leave him, right? She did the ultimate no-no. I always thought it was definitely payback. But he had convinced my sisters of this, that she was going to be treated special. So she was there, I think it was like 6 weeks, and we were not allowed to see her. And we had all been on a shopping trip. I was 13, and this was all planned. And they were going to drop her off afterwards, and she did not have a clue. And as you'll read in the book, you know, she was dressed in her stilettos and her beautiful clothes, and still, because it was pretty short, it was 2 or 3 years after the divorce, and she still had some decent things to wear. And I just remember, you know, I won't tell you what happened all in the car and everything when she realized where she was. All I can remember is seeing the bottom of her stiletto, the heels dragged across the sidewalk going into Whitfield in a straitjacket. So, you know, the stories that she told afterwards were just ungodly. I mean, shock treatments, ice baths, you know, the whole things they did back then. And some people did not come out alive. Well, when my mother, it was time for her to get out, we were all waiting for her. My dad had bought a little, literally, cinder block, 2-bedroom house, and she was going to, he did not give her the deed. He was just letting her live there, but he wanted her to, because of this, she deserved a nice place to live. So we're all waiting for her, and we're excited at my sister's house, and we're going to throw a party for her. And she didn't want us to, we weren't allowed to pick her up. There was a man she was dating that picked her up before she had gone in there. So she walks in, and we've got balloons and, you know, signs up and congratulations, Mama, we're glad you're home. She walks in. She always held her head high, and she always had a cigarette. She walks in. She's dressed in her stilettos. She's got her mink on. She walked in with her cigarette. We're like, Mom, you know, and everybody's so excited. We're so proud of her that she's sober. And she did not say a word. She set her purse down on the table, opened it up. She pulled out a pint of Jack Daniels. She unscrewed the cap. She tilted her head back because she drank Jack Daniels straight. She drank the entire pint. She set it down, flipped the cap across the room, and said, I will stop drinking when I am good and damn ready. And turned around and walked out the door. That was my mother.
Yeah. And then, you know, so she's claiming something for herself then. And then I think of the story of when your dad tried to get you to take over the business. And you had a moment of having to claim something for yourself. Mm-hmm. And can you talk about what that experience was like?
Well, I was living in L.A., you know, and my father hated me living in L.A. with Californians. And I'm one of them. But he asked me I'd been out here for quite a while, and he asked me would I meet him in Nashville, that he needed to talk to me, meet him at the Grand Ole Opry Hotel. Well, I knew something was up. I didn't know what. I knew he had not been feeling well and was not doing good, and, you know, I would go home and visit. But I thought for him to have someone, his wife, to drive him to Nashville to meet me, something's up. So I go, and I don't know. I don't know if I'd been out here 20 years by that point. It'd been a long time. And he said, you know, he wanted to meet me downstairs in the lobby area of the Opryland Hotel. And he said, I've been thinking about this, and I don't know how much longer I'm going to be around, and I want you to come back to Waynesboro, and I want you to run my oil business, because that's where he made his money, in the oil business. And he was stuttering because he stuttered, and you'll read that in the book. And he said, so if you come back, if you take this offer, I know you probably got some bills out in California. He said, I will pay off your house. Any debt you have, anything, whatever. You come home, you'll come home debt-free, and I'll give you my entire business. I want you to run it. I'll give you the entire business. Well, first of all, I couldn't believe. I was flattered and just appalled at the same time. I couldn't believe that he was wanting me to run it, because, one of my sisters that I'm very close to is, been much more suited for that. So I just looked at him, because I was flattered. It was a big thing to him. But at the same time, I was mad, because I thought, he doesn't give any credit at all to my career and who I am and what I do and really just who I am. And I just thought, okay, I felt like I was, not that I'm Jesus and my dad was Satan, but I felt like that it was Satan on the mountaintop going, you can have all of this if you just come home. And I'm thinking, oh my God, Waynesboro, Mississippi, get out of the music business, sell oil, my soul would die. And so I said, Daddy, I said, I am so honored and I am so humbled. And I said, but I would die there. And all I know is music, and I can't do what I do there. And I appreciate so much. And I said, but second of all, I just want you to know, I would never inherit or take your business. That would be split equally between the four of us, my sisters, all of us. I would never do that, ever do that to a sister of mine. So, no, I can't do it. And two, I would never do it that way. And he frowned, and he was smoking a cigarette, and he got up and said it was time for him to go back to Mississippi.
I could talk to you about this book all day, and I want to make sure that we have a chance to have questions from here, because we've got a few more minutes left. I know we've got some microphones there, Jim and Bruce. Who has a question or something I'd like to ask Tena? We've got some over here, I think, back there.
Hi. First of all, thank you so much for being here. I'm very excited to read your book. Secondly, I'm trying to put this in the right way. Having read Pat Conroy and many things and seen movies and seen Prince of Tides and all of that, being a Northerner, I've never lived in the South. And we know that every part of this country has its own issues. There's no question, there's no perfection, but it seems like the South has a unique kind of pathology that you read about and see. And I guess I want you to reflect on, why do you think that's so? How did that happen in the South, and it didn't seem to happen the same way in other parts of the country?
You know, that's a great question, and I've always reflected on Pat Conroy's Prince of Tides, because I felt like, in a way, that's what I'd lived. Once I saw that film and read the book, that not that particular scenario happened where, you know, people get raped and beat and everything else, and then, oh, let's hurry up, Daddy's coming home, let's brush ourselves off and just say, pass the peas, please. But that's what it was like. And my father was an expert, like someone else we all know right now in our country, at gaslighting. And it's kind of like if you didn't see what you saw, it didn't happen. And if you said it happened, then you were looked at like you were crazy. So you were you were subjected to all of this stuff and saw all these things, but if you didn't repeat it or digest it the way that somebody wanted you to, it wasn't real. So I think that was the hardest thing for me growing up, and the thing that I actually had to eventually deal with many, many years ago in therapy was, I need to know if the sun is shining, if it's really shining. I need to know if black is really black and blue is really blue and whatever it may be, because my head is all messed up on, did I really see that? Did I really see my father fill up a swimming pool because he did at one of his hotels because he did not want black people in that pool? Did I really see my mother, whatever? There was a million things. And so I just think, look, I've been all over the country in the last 3 weeks on this tour, and I know there's crazy everywhere. And I know, and especially back in that era, but there still is. But I think that the South, which seems to me to have its own level of this, different from anybody else, everything has to look so perfect. Everything needs to be pretty on the outside. We have to pretend that, that we've just got the perfect family and we've got it all dressed nice and look nice, but it is excuse my language, but shit show behind the door. And I still see it there. I still see it there. And I'm sure y'all have friends or family members that they still live that way, even in Pasadena. But so worried about their friends, so worried about what the people at church are going to think. And so it is at a different level there. And I have just been so amazed and grateful at the conversations that have been happening since I wrote this book in these cities that I go into, these southern cities, and it's real conversations. And it's like Maya used to say, we're more alike than we're not. But there's so many people and so many horrific stories and so many, that, and then people too that from other states. But mostly, you're right. We have a real title on that. And ask me why, for sure, I do not know. I just think it was the way they did it and the way they continue to for the most part.
Over here, Jim.
So I'm going to read your book, and I can't wait. I grew up in rural Pennsylvania, and me and my friends often kind of talk about when we visit, looking around, how did we grow up out of this soil? Because how did we get out of the cycle? And I'm curious for you, how did you get out of the cycle, and what woke you up to be the person you are?
The only thing, I get asked that question a lot because I was somewhat of an anomaly, and not that I feel like I was special or chosen or anything like that. It's just I think I had a pretty horrific incident that happened at about 4 or 5 years old that made me know, no doubt. I mean, look, we all know none of us are born racist. None of us are born homophobic. None of us are born with any prejudices. We're taught those. And everything around me was pretty much racist. But I don't know that I had ever computed it at that point. But every season in the fall, we had tons of pecan trees on our farm. And so my dad would it'd be 2 or 3 truckloads of black people that would come out and pick pecans. And not that he did that for a living, he just had these folks to pick the pecans so that he could give them to clients and business friends. Well, I was so excited when this would happen every year because I was by myself it was like I was an only child because all my sisters were gone. And so I would get to play. and there would be children there, and it would be so exciting to me. So I was out in the field, and I was running and holding hands with this little black girl in the field, and we were having the best time, and I heard my mom come to the back door and back screen door and just scream for me to come inside. Well, it was like someone had died. So I dropped the little girl's hand, I went running inside, and when I got to the back door, my mom grabbed me by my wrist. My mom was never violent with me in any way. I had never heard my mom say that word, and I read that word in that book, but that's even hard, but I had to because I did not want to paint anything that was not true, and I think when you tell the whole story, you have to tell the whole story. But I will not use that word right now, but she said to me, she dragged me across by my arm. I remember I had some kind of sleeveless thing with a little sweater on. She was so angry, and she'd already been drinking, and Virgie, my nanny, was standing in the kitchen. She grabbed my arm and pulled it over the sink, I guess it was this arm, pulled it over the sink, and I remember it hurting under my arm. And she got a pink Brillo pad, and she started scrubbing my hand, and she said, "Don't you ever hold hands with again, ever. They have germs. They're nasty. Your daddy would be so mad." And she goes into this whole thing, and I'm just in shock. And I'm crying, and I'm looking at Virgie, and as she's scrubbing, I just looked at her, and the only thing, what came out of my mouth was, "But Mama, Virgie doesn't have germs. Virgie kisses me. Virgie tucks me in. Virgie bathes me. She gets me dressed. Virgie loves me. Virgie doesn't have germs." And she just, I have to tell you, it was the craziest thing, because my mother was never violent like that before, and she was never violent like that ever. She had never used that word before. She never used it again. She fell on the counter and started sobbing, and Virgie was just standing there with her head down, and my mom just wiped her eyes and walked out. And at that moment, I don't know 100% sure, but inside of me, I feel like that I thought, this is wrong, and this is right. And there was a definitive thing inside of me that I knew, no matter what, even though maybe I did not, it was not in my brain quite as sophisticated, but I would never err on the side of what that was. And I would always defend love. I would always defend the underdogs. I would always defend truth and righteousness. And I just believe that's what changed me.
And then as you went on, and as you grew up, you tell some really incredible stories. I don't know, we're at like 11, but about how you really struggled. How do you use your power to try to live that way? And going through some stories where you realized that you used some powers in ways that were well-intended, but that were harmful. And so you've had to struggle with, okay, you had that moment of clarity, but it is so messy and it is so complicated of how you do that. And that's a journey I think that we're all still on. Mm-hmm. So I wish we had time to stay here a lot longer. Will you come back?
I will.
Okay, great. Can we say thank you so much to Tena Clarke?
Thank you.